Welcome back for another episode of the Silver and Blue Podcast. We are back for episode 20. It is our first game week episode. We started this podcast in the off season, and man, we've been talking, Corey. We've been talking a lot of draft. We've been talking a lot of off season moves. Now it's finally time to talk some games. And joining us, a very special guest from live from the Star, Kyle Youmans. Did I say that right, Kyle?
Yeah, you got it. Yeomans, what's up? I mean, it's the easiest way to describe it is just drop that U.
Awesome. Well, Kyle, we're really excited to have you on. Excited to talk some Cowboys with you guys. So let's get started. I guess before we jump into talking about what's going to go on with the Bucs game here on Sunday night this week. Let's talk about Jason Peters. So it was announced over the weekend. We kind of heard all weekend that it was probably going to happen. And it was confirmed on Monday that Jason Peters was going to be a Cowboy, which I got to say is really weird to see after growing up, just seeing him always on the Eagles. So definitely weird to see. But Jason Peters is officially a Cowboy. Kyle, what's their plan with Peters as far as ramping him up? Will he immediately start when he's ready? What's their game plan there? What have you heard on that?
Well, I think first off, it gives the Cowboys options on the offensive line. I mean, that's something that they couldn't necessarily talk about initially because with the injury to Tyron Smith, your number one option would be to move Tyler Smith out to left tackle. And then if something were to happen there, then it would be Josh Ball or Matt Waletzko as your next option at the tackle spot. So none of those necessarily sound appealing. Outside of the Tyler Smith move, I mean, he's expected at some point to be your left tackle of the future when Tyron Smith is done with his career. That timeline just gets moved up with the injury to Tyron this early on in the preseason, and then now into the regular season. He has an opportunity to go and win that job. And if Tyler Smith goes out and plays the way that he could at that left tackle spot, if he impresses people at that left tackle spot, Jason Peters is now an extra option. Could he slide inside and play guard for Connor McGovern, depending on how McGovern plays through the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season? Would Jason Peters be a backup to Tyler Smith just in case something were to happen to the rookie if Tyler indeed does go and win that job? Or he could come in there and start. So there's 3 different options there for Peters moving forward. But ultimately, it gives you another voice in the locker room that's an experienced piece of a storied history on that offensive line. Tyron Smith, Zach Martin allow that to happen with Tyler Smith and really put him in a place to be successful. But without Tyron in the fold, and he's now on IR, he's on a different schedule, different game plan than the rest of the team. So Tyler doesn't have that opportunity to learn. Now he has that again. So Peters even said it himself yesterday that whatever the Cowboys need, he's there for. He even said, yeah, it's a little bit weird to be wearing these colors and not the green and white like he had previously, but he's excited about the opportunity, and he wanted to go somewhere where he's valued, and that's certainly the case here in Dallas.
Yeah, so I just have a kind of a follow-up to kind of all of that about, Tyler Smith possibly sliding in, depending on how McGovern's playing, or, worst case scenario, in some ways, if Terrence Steele struggles at right tackle, and we get to the end of the season, I know Jerry's been optimistic about Tyron Smith coming back for a playoff push and things like that. Do you see, best case scenario, do you think that either Tyron or Jason Peters or maybe even Tyler Smith could slide over to right tackle in that dream scenario that Jerry's brought up a couple of times?
It does feel like a dream scenario, right? Having Tyron on the left side, Zach Martin at right guard, and then you have Jason Peters. That's 3 future Hall of Famers on your offensive line at one time. Now, of course, 2 of those 3 are at the back end of their career. But I really do think that's a possibility. And Jason Peters moved over to right tackle and played, I think, 400 snaps or so with the Philadelphia Eagles back in 2020 prior to his tenure there coming to an end. And he was a little banged up that year as well. But I think that's a possibility, especially if, let's say, Tyler Smith plays exceptionally well, or Connor McGovern. Either one of those 2 plays really well in the early parts of the season. They will be your left guard when Tyron comes back. At least that appears to be the case. Then you would swing if Terrence Steele has some problems and he's maybe either hurt or doesn't play well. You could put Jason Peters out there at right tackle. I don't think they would move Tyron I think they would move Jason Peters, especially since he's done it before, and Tyron has played the entirety of the left side of the offensive line throughout his career. So it's a dream scenario. It's sometimes it feels like a pipe dream scenario, but ultimately, I really do think it's an option for the Cowboys if everything goes that way. Best case scenario, though, Tyler Smith plays well, Connor McGovern plays well, Terrence Steele play well. Then you just got 7 guys on your offensive line that you can really feel good about, and you can mix and match those guys however you want.
Yeah, it seems like their best 5 at this point, in my opinion, is probably from left to right, Tyler Smith, or Peters at left tackle, Tyler Smith at guard, Biotish, Martin, and Steele. But obviously Peters isn't ready. So, Connor McGovern has struggled at left guard before. And, there's a scenario where, he struggles and maybe you move Tyler Smith back inside to guard. Because Tyler Smith, in the little bit we saw of him in the preseason left guard, he looked good and he looked like he could move some people in the run game. So I guess, all of this kind of hinges on whether or not Tyler Smith looks comfortable at left tackle and if he's ready. If he's ready, it's hard to imagine them moving him out if he's playing well. You can't really move him out if he's playing well. So, a lot of this kind of hinges just on how Tyler Smith looks. Now, Kyle, is there a timeline on when Peters is going to be ready? Because they said they're going to take their time, and obviously, he's 40 years old. That's really rare to have an offensive lineman still in the league at 40 years old. And, to be honest, last year at Chicago, he isn't what he was, but he was still very solid for Chicago last year. If you go back and look at his numbers, again, not what he was, but, still a pretty decent left tackle. So you know what the timeline is for him?
Yeah. And he played 15 games last year and was a 77, I believe, grade wise according to Pro Football Focus. Like he graded out really well in his games last year. He said that it's going to be a couple of weeks. And by a couple of weeks, I would assume maybe week 2 against the Cincinnati Bengals is a realistic possibility of when he could be ramped up and ready. Even then, though, I don't know if he would start. I think he would be active. Would he be available? That's a different story. He has been participating in practice. And he's, by the way, you mentioned rare in terms of 40-year-olds on the offensive line. He's the second oldest practice player in the history of the NFL. The other one was his previous teammate in Philadelphia, a guy who he blocked for in Josh McCown. So only those 2 guys have been 40-plus years old and have spent time on the practice squad. And that's just an opportunity for him to really get going and find a rhythm himself back into NFL action. I think it'll be ready before you know it. And then, of course, that's where the options would come along for that offensive line.
Yeah,
right, so I want to shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about, I know they started prep for Tampa Bay today.
Yeah.
And I saw some Michael Gallup doing some things. What is the timeline looking at for Michael Gallup right now?
Yeah, at least from everything that I've heard, it's basically the conversation is not week 1. That's the timeline that I've heard from people around the building is not week 1, but close. You're getting there. And he was even limited and he did some stuff today. Everything is checked the boxes, and you got to really give credit to him, his work ethic, and the way that he's been able to rehab throughout. And even Britt Brown in this entire training staff, it's well known that they're one of the best in the business at what they do. The fact that he's gotten back to this point, they're not going to throw him out there before he's ready, but they are going to throw him into scenarios to see if he is ready at different times throughout the week of practice. And I think that's kind of what they're doing, keeping him limited, working him back into in-game shape. I think week 2, maybe week 3. I would probably say week 3 is more likely, but week 2 is a possibility as well for him to be active and a part of this roster. And that's certainly a huge thing for this Cowboys team that looks pretty thin at wide receivers at times.
Yeah. So before we get into the Bucs, and I guess this is kind of semi-related to the Bucs because this was one of the first things I wanted to talk about as it pertained to them was, I try to not read too much into, depth charts and stuff like it, depth charts are depth charts, they don't matter that much. But one thing that did jump out to me on the depth chart, and it was a guy the coaches had raved about all camp, was Quinton Bohanna above Neville Gallimore on the depth chart. And that was surprising because Neville Gallimore and Osa are kind of your 2, in my opinion, probably your 2 best defensive tackles. And that kind of ties into the first thing I want to talk about with the Bucs, because they have a pretty banged up offensive line, losing Ryan Jensen and Camp, and I believe they had another potential starter go down. And Tom Brady, the way you beat Tom Brady is you push the pocket, you get pressure in his face, especially at 45 years old. He's not super mobile anymore. So I guess start off with how much should you read into that depth chart, having Quentin Bohanna at the first string defensive tackle, and how much does the staff apparently like him?
Yeah, I think they like him a lot. And going into the season, or at least in the training camp, you saw him and John Ridgeway as two guys fighting for that true nose tackle spot. I mean, Neville Gallimore, he's a 3 technique, has nose capabilities, but he'll play that 3 technique kind of off to the side a little bit. Same thing with Osa Odighizuwa and Tristan Hill. Now, Hill's more of a true 3 technique. You can put him out as a 5 technique, a little bit further away from the head up on the center spot of the defensive line. But Quentin Bohanna, outside of your guys that you've kind of thrown into the mix there too, with a Chauncey Golston and a John Ridgeway, he's your only true nose tackle that's active on the roster, I think, at the moment. So keep that in mind moving forward. And there's so much movement. Dan Quinn showed that last year, that substitutions, movement, different fronts, different looks from a defense is not necessarily out of the ordinary. You're going to see Neville Gallimore up there with Osa Odighizuwa quite a bit, and he's still expected to be a huge playmaker for that defense. But I think it's the run-stuffing ability and just the way that he's shown a work ethic since arriving last year as a late-round pick, somebody that really wasn't counted on last year. I think Bohanna is going to have a legitimate role in this defense moving forward. And you're right. I think it starts this week. Tom Brady, even kind of like how Dak Prescott, let's say Dak Prescott last year going into the season, he had Tyron Smith. Of course, he had Connor Williams and he has Lyle Collins, all 3 guys that he will be without on week 1. You could say the same thing for Tom Brady and their week 1 starting offensive line last year. Their left guard, their center, and their right guard are all now gone from their starting offensive line a year ago. So there's changes up front for Tampa Bay just as much as there's changes and question marks up front for this Dallas Cowboys offense. So that allows for the interior of that defensive line to really go out there and have a good game. And I think that's where you're going to disrupt Tom Brady the majority on Sunday night. And that's exactly what this Cowboys defense is going to aim to do.
I want to just shift gears to the offense just real quick. I know last year, Tampa Bay week 1, the Cowboys really didn't even attempt to run the football at all. It was pretty much the Dak show. Amari Cooper had a really good game. Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, and all the guys really contributed. Do you think the Cowboys are going into this week with a similar game plan, or do you kind of see them being a more balanced attack? I know Mike McCarthy talked about at the press conference today that they kind of focused on those team practices when they practiced against the Broncos and Chargers, that they were kind of focused on the run game. Do you think that translates into week 1, or do you think they kind of go with a similar game plan as far as throwing the football?
Yeah, you mentioned it. I mean, 18 carries for 60 yards. Is that what it was last year for that Tampa Bay game? That's never going to get the job done in terms of balance. Now, it helps when your quarterback throws for 403 yards, which is what Dak Prescott did. They don't want to do that again. They really don't. And I think you're going to try and run the football more effectively. That's part of the reason why they made the draft pick in Tyler Smith, is because of how dominant he was in the run game and going downhill and moving people out of the way. You said it yourself, Corey, a little bit ago, is he is a mover. I mean, he is so strong at the point of attack. If he can get the footwork down, he really has an opportunity to be great up front. He's not there yet, but guess what he can do right now? And that's run block. And so I expect them to run behind Tyler Smith. I expect them to utilize Zach Martin on the right side and Terrence Steele, who had a solid season a year ago as a run blocker as well. Expect those guys to be run behind quite a bit in the early parts of this football game, especially when you're trying to work in some of these young wide receivers. You don't want extra help from the secondary for these wide receivers to deal with. You want them to load the box at points and try and dare you to throw the football, because that's when Dak Prescott can be at his best and he can do what he did last year and throw for 400 yards. He just doesn't want to have to do it 56 times, throw it 56 times to get to that 400-yard mark.
I just have one quick follow-up. Who are the second and third receivers for this team when they line up on Sunday?
Right now it's Noah Brown, and I would say, man, that's the third one's where you really get questioned. I would say it's Noah Brown for sure is the number 2, and then probably Jalen Tolbert, Cavante Turpin in that mix too. But don't count out the possibility of Simi Fehoko and Dennis Houston playing a major role because it is so jumbled at the third spot. It's CeeDee Lamb, of course, at the top, and I expect him to have a massive season. Then you've got Noah Brown there. I think he's going to have a career year. And then those 3 other guys, along with Turpin, I still kind of put Turpin in a special teams fold, but expect those guys to really get a lot of looks. Fehoko, Houston, and Tolbert kind of mixing and matching throughout the week.
So the area of concern for me is, I've been really worried about this offensive line all off season, and that was even before the Tyron Smith injury.
Yeah.
There's question marks all over the offensive line here. We've never seen Terrence Steele as a full-time starter. Zach Martin, I'm not sure he's much of a question mark. He's Zach Martin, but Biadasz got better, but struggled at times. Connor McGovern has really struggled left guard before, and Tyler Smith has played the same amount of snaps at left tackle in the NFL as I have. So we're going to find out pretty quickly about this offensive line. And, I think it'll improve as the year goes on, but you look at, these guys that Tampa's going to be rolling out there up front. You got Vita Vea, Akeem Hicks, Shaq Barrett. Shaq Barrett's a hell of a welcome to the NFL for Tyler Smith. You got Joe Tryon. I mean, they got guys up and down that defensive front that are going to put pressure on Dak. And, I wonder what Todd Bowles' game plan looks like, because last year, the Buccaneers, they made an effort to put pressure on Dak all night long. And one of the best qualities of Dak Prescott is how good he is against the blitz. I mean, you blitz him, he'll dice you up. That's probably one of the best things. One of his best qualities, just especially how good he is pre-snap, getting the protection set up. Like, that's what Dak's great at. So, whether or not this offensive line can hold up if Tampa's rushing 4 or not, I think that might just decide the game. Where are you at with the offensive line and how they match up with a pretty gnarly defensive front in Tampa Bay?
Yeah, it's hard to match up with Tampa Bay, period. I don't care who you are. If you're Vita Vea against you, you're probably going to lose some battles. It's just the fact of the matter. Same thing with Shaq Barrett and company on that other side. And there's a lot of respect, I think, for that front 7 around the NFL. But there are question marks for this offensive line. And I've been right there with you, Nate, because when it comes to this team and the way that they've been successful in the past, they've done so behind dominant offensive lines. Right now, you can look at this offensive line and say, okay, they're good. They're not dominant. And whenever you're going up against the dominant force like Tampa Bay defensively, you may have some growing pains. And I think that's what you're going to see. Now, the positive side of it is Terrence Steele, you mentioned it as a full-time starter. I know he's moved around, but you look at his career numbers. I mean, he's played in 32 games. He started in 27 of those. I mean, over 2 seasons, he's had 27 starts. Whether it be at left tackle or right tackle. Now, this is his chance to really settle into a spot, and I think that's something that you don't necessarily know how it's going to turn out, but you can count on him at least getting an opportunity and showing what he has at right tackle, where he was much more comfortable as a starter in the NFL. As far as Connor McGovern, going back to last year, and I agree with you in the fact that he did struggle in 2021, at camp, I remember asking about Connor and seeing really where he was, because he was kind of battling for the backup center spot, even trying to challenge Connor McGovern for the left guard spot. And I remember having a couple good practices there to build on. And I went up to somebody in Oxnard and they said, no, I think he's still not there yet. He's not learning the right way. He's not taking everything in the way and being a sponge that you need to be if you are going to ultimately be a starter at the NFL level. That's not the case this year. That was last year. And this year, I went up and asked the same person. I said, what is Connor McGovern doing this year? I was like, now he's got a chance to be a starter. And he said, you know what? He's really changed his ways. He's soaking things up. He understands the playbook. He knows the calls. He could do the calls if he really wanted to at the line of scrimmage. Now, of course, you've got Tyler Biadasz that has been able to, as a 3-year starter, kind of assume that role. but he's been solid at the left guard spot. And it's part of the reason why Tyler Smith didn't win that job outright. Now they both have an opportunity to win that job against each other as Tyler Smith goes to left tackle and Connor McGovern goes to left guard. So it's certainly going to be interesting. Definitely no questions answered until we get to week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the season. Then you can maybe look at and say, okay, man, this offensive line either is not ready or they've kind of surprised some people. I'm kind of halfway in the middle right now. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to expect out of this offensive line. It could go either way and be a complete disaster, or it could be a complete surprise, and hopefully it's a surprise on that side of things.
Absolutely. So this is another kind of big topic among the Cowboys. It seems like every year we're told that this guy is going to have a bigger role in the offense. We're going to take Zeke off the field a little bit more and feature Tony Pollard in the offense. Where do you stand on that? And are we finally going to see that this year?
I think it's still going to be a split. It is a split backfield. Let's say it that way. I think Zeke's going to get his carries. Don't get me wrong. And he may still see 60% of the carries to Tony Pollard's 40% of the carries throughout the season. But it's a tandem that works together. And in having conversations with Skip Pete, the running backs coach, he says that. He says Tony and Zeke are better together than they are separately, because Ezekiel Elliott, he's not going to be that explosive back 2016 to 2018 where he was leading the NFL in rushing yards and yards per attempt and touchdowns. He'll still have his fair share of touchdowns and short goals, or it's short yardage situations. But Zeke is the pounded back. He's the bell cow that's going to run down a defense's throat and wear down a front seven over time, to where when the fastball of Tony Pollard, where he's put his foot in the ground and get up the field sort of player, that's where you're going to see the big plays happen and the explosiveness from this Cowboys offense. And I think that's where Tony Pollard has carved out a role for himself rather than taking over the majority of the carries. I expect them also to be on the field quite a bit at the same time moving into this regular season, because having both of those guys, either as Tony Pollard as a wide receiver, Ezekiel Elliott could go out wide as well, they present these different skill sets to each other that complement the run game and complement what you can do on the ground. And it sets up play action for Dak Prescott. Nate mentioned a moment ago how good Dak Prescott is against the blitz. Part of that is how good he is off of play action and allowing his offense to keep a defense off balance from certain times. That's why you have to run the football.
So, that's how they're looking, running the ball. On the other side of the ball, in terms of how they're gonna check Tampa Bay passing the ball. Tampa Bay has a nice little collection of receivers. Obviously Mike Evans, Chris Godwin is back this week. They picked up Russell Gage, who is a really underrated, down roster type receiver, who has had some decent years in Atlanta. Julio Jones, who Julio Jones might be a little washed, but it's still Julio Jones. They have Kyle Rudolph. Where are you at on how the Cowboys are going to how the secondary is going to hold up against them? Because there's some questions about their depth and some injury issues with Jordan Lewis. So to start with Jordan Lewis. What's his status heading into the week with his hamstring that he's been dealing with? And then just overall, how you think the secondary is going to match up with Tampa Bay's pass catchers?
Yeah, I talked to Jordan a couple moments ago when we were in the open locker room, and he even said everything still looks good for Sunday. So he looks like he's ready to go. He was a full participant today, or actually it technically called him limited on the injury report. So I would expect Jordan Lewis to go come Sunday Night Football. And if he's not, then that gives an opportunity for some of these young corners to step up and play. But I think Jordan is going to be fully ready to go. Now, as far as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers go in terms of their wide receiving core, you really got to – it starts with Mike Evans. 8 straight years of 1,000 yards receiving, longest active streak in the NFL, and the longest such streak to start a career in NFL history. That's more than Jerry Rice, more than Randy Moss, more than all these big-time names. He has consistently been a top receiver in the NFL, and I expect that to continue here this season. Now, Russell Gage, a little bit banged up. He's got a hamstring injury. He did practice today, was a little bit limited, so keep that in mind. Chris Godwin, at least before today, it kind of seemed like he wasn't going to play. but he was a full participant in practice, at least on the injury report, because he's still dealing with that knee coming and working back into the mix. But so was Michael Gallup. Michael Gallup was a limited participant in practice too. So just because he's completely in practice doesn't mean he's ready to go 100%. So I think if the Cowboys were going to meet this Tampa Bay team and see this Tampa Bay team, week 1 is probably the best week to do so, because Mike Evans fully healthy, Russell Gage a little banged up, Chris Godwin definitely banged up. Then you've got Julio Jones, who missed practice today for what was a non-football or non-injury reason. So I think you're catching them at a good time, especially when you were able to shut down Mike Evans a year ago and really get into the mix with Trayvon Diggs. He had an interception. He had 2 pass breakups, only allowed 3 receptions for 24 yards. I expect there to be a lot of options moving forward for this secondary to have an impact on the Tampa Bay passing game.
All right, and I guess as we get ready to close this thing out, what do you see as the keys for the Cowboys to come away with a win this Sunday night?
I think it starts with pressuring Tom Brady, because you're not going to really outsmart Tom Brady. You're not going to continuously trick him. And even Mike McCarthy said that today in his press conference. He said, we're not going to try and get into a chess match. That's the last thing you want to do with the greatest of all time whenever it comes to playing chess in terms of playing football and setting up an offense for success. So they don't want to do that. What they want to do is they want to execute their game plan, and they need to stay focused from beginning to end. And that's get after Tom Brady, stay sticky in coverage, and don't let up. Because if you show a weakness, Tom Brady's going to find a way to exploit it. Your offense, they're probably going to struggle at times, especially with the front 7 and an offensive line that's still trying to get their footing together. I think there's going to be some growing pains for the offense early on in this game, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to have their lumps. I think the Cowboys have an opportunity to win this game if their offense plays decent, and then if their defense plays to the ceiling that they can. I think the Cowboys have an advantage in this ball game. Now, I can't believe I'm saying this just because of what has conspired prior to 2020 or even prior to last season. This defense has a chance to be special, and this is a chance for it to show on Sunday Night Football in front of the world that they are special. And I expect that to happen against Tom Brady and the Bucs.
Yeah, they've talked a lot about, Dan Quinn in year 2. Dan Quinn's always talking about, well, you hear about players improving in year 2. Well, this is year 2 of the same system. So they do have a chance to take leap. And one thing, these are 2 very different teams from where they were on week 1 last year when they played. One big difference is we didn't quite know about Micah Parsons as a pass rusher at this point last year before the season. That didn't kind of show up until the Chargers game. So I'm excited. Brady does get the ball out really, really quickly, so it's going to be a little hard to put some heat on him. But if the Cowboys win this game, they're going to have to do it with their special defensive front, because they have guys up and down that front 7 that can really get after the passer. It's not even just the defensive linemen. I mean, like Micah Parsons, Anthony Barr has some pass rush ability. So yeah. I'm excited to see how this game's going to be won by either defensive line. I think both defensive lines are very, very good, and they're going against a couple offensive lines that have a lot of question marks right now. So, I really think that this is going to come down to the defensive lines. Before we get out of here, let's everyone's got to give a little prediction here. We'll let Corey get, or let's Kyle, you want to go first on your prediction here?
Yeah, why not? I'll go first. Give me the Cowboys in a tightly contested defensive score. I'm going to say 17 to well, I think that's too easy. I can't say like 17-14. Usually it's like a weird score. Give me like a 19-16 final score. Something real weird.
Okay, so it's
wildly off. That's how it's going to turn out. Give me 19-16 Dallas Cowboys.
I like it.
All right, Corey.
So I'm gonna take Tampa Bay. I just think that Tom Brady's gonna make just one more play than the Cowboys will be able to make. And I like his weapons a little bit more than I like Dak's weapons right now. And I'm gonna say a score of, like, you went with an odd score. Let's go with like 25 to 14, like something like that. So
We're trying for the scoregami.
Yeah, we're going for the
scoregami. Trying to find something different here.
I'm going to be a little more vanilla here. I think Cowboys are going to be able to get it done here. Just, playing at home is going to help a lot. And, I think putting pressure on Tom Brady affects him a lot more than pressure affects Dak. And I think the Cowboys' defensive front's going to be able to get after it a little bit here. I'm going to go 21-20 Cowboys. Not quite scoregami weird score, but 24-21 was a little too easy. But
yeah,
so
a couple field goals.
21-20. I think we're all on the same page though in terms of this being a lower scoring defensive type game because the headline is Tom Brady, Dak Prescott. You think a lot of points? I really don't think so. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're all on the same page there. Before we get out of here. Just want to say thank you for doing this, Kyle. This was a blast. We'll definitely be bugging you in the future to come back on here. So yeah, make sure to check out everything going on at the Dallas Sports Fanatic. Be sure to check out everything on our website with our constant content with articles and everything. Be sure to check out Silver and Blue Podcast. Check out Corey's Twitter at the Mr. Douglas, as you can see on your screen. My Twitter at Nate_Sanch77. And make sure to go subscribe to the YouTube. It is just under Dallas Sports Fanatic. Thank you for doing this, Kyle. You got anything else you want to plug for what you got going on over at the Star?
Yeah, DallasCowboys.com. We've got everything you need in terms of Cowboys coverage, and we've got pregame live coming up this week on Sunday nights. It's me, Barry Church, Isaiah Stanback, and Nate Newton hosting a roundtable, big time pregame show for. Right before kickoff, leading into kickoff, that Sunday Night Football matchup. So check that out, and then everything else on DallasCowboys.com and also on Dallas Sports Fanatic. I used to write for Dallas Sports Fanatic, so always going to be a fan for you guys. Back when I was in college at North Texas, I wrote for the Stars and the Rangers and even TCU football for a little bit. So always great seeing you guys, and you put out great content.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Be sure to check out everything we got going on, and we will talk to you next time on the Silver and Blue Podcast.